Meanwhile, I want to show you something else now. Take a look at these 4 images that we've prepared for you, okay? Images that we've created to show you something. One is, we're going to show you the violent disturbances that took place in Ferguson, just outside of St. Louis, Missouri. This was back in 2014, with protests that continued for more than 2 weeks. Remember that? Okay. It says Venezuela riots there, but we're actually showing you different protests, all right? We also have the violent clashes of police in Baltimore, Maryland in 2015 that lasted almost 3 weeks with countless injuries. And then there's the famous Rodney King riots, as they've come to be known, where it seemed that part of Los Angeles would just go up in flames. That was in 1992. I could take you back to the McDuffie riots in Miami as well. I was in those, covered those. Then, for more perspective, there's the Yellow Vest protests that have now been going on in the streets of Paris, France for more than 17 weeks, and have included police vehicles burning with clashes with authorities. I wanted to show you those because I wanted to give you some perspective on this, because we think words matter. In fact, I know words matter. It's what I work with for a living, right? That's my tool. I'm a writer. None of those incidents that I just showed you, although some of them were much longer and just as dangerous, some of them were deadly, as what's happening today in Venezuela, none of those were ever referred to by television reporters at networks like CNN or the BBC as uprisings. They weren't called uprisings. They were called disturbances. Sometimes they were called clashes. Sometimes they were called riots. But uprising? It's almost as if the government of the United States or Venezuela were being overthrown and you were watching it in living color. Yet that's exactly what the media labeled this story today. Right from Jump Street. Before it happened, they already had a banner saying uprising in Venezuela, as if it had been requested by the Trump administration or the opposition leader Juan Guaido. Look, whether you're for Guaido or you like Maduro, it's not our job to care. We wondered if this is the right thing for members of the media to do, to actually pick sides and allow politicians or a government to label or steer, which is the best word to describe it, their coverage. John Huddy joins us now from our Southeast Bureau. John, give our audience some context or some perspective of the coverage of this thing today.
Well, you said something really important. You said words matter in journalism, and I couldn't agree with you more. Words do matter in journalism. It's our tool. We are journalists. I've covered riots as well. You have too. And today, words like coup, which means the sudden, violent, and illegal seizure of power from a government, and words like uprising, as you just mentioned, have been used by the media to describe the situation in Venezuela. But are these words fair to use in assessing the situation going on there? Are they an accurate description or simply part of the narrative promulgated by the politicians and pundits?
It was just after dawn when Juan Guaido posted this video calling for Venezuelans to take to the streets, support democratic forces, and, quote, regain our freedom as part of what he called Operation Freedom. What followed has been a day of protests and, at times, violent clashes between protesters and national police in what the media has described as an uprising. At one point, CNN even called it a coup attempt, drawing the wrath of Florida Senator Marco Rubio on Twitter. An uprising is defined as an act of resistance or rebellion, a revolt. It is clear what's happening in Venezuela is an act of resistance against the Maduro government with U.S. backing. What's unclear is how far the situation will go. That is, will it result in a change in government, or will the media pivot to something else once the news cycle changes and the public attention wanes? For some historical context, let's look at other demonstrations and protests worldwide that have garnered extensive media coverage and those that haven't. Most recently, the so-called Yellow Vest movement in France, where protesters have clashed with police for close to 6 months now, has certainly piqued the public's interest. But it has not been called an uprising by the mainstream or what some call the corporate media. And who can forget some of the big stories here in the United States, like the Los Angeles riots of 1992, the Miami McDuffie riots in 1980, and the protests in Baltimore, Maryland in 2015, and Ferguson, Missouri in 2014. Well, those stemmed from cases of police brutality and alleged police brutality, and thus thrust the national and international spotlight on issues of political and social importance in the United States. But there have been other uprisings, protests, and demonstrations that have hardly received any attention or media coverage. Last week, for instance, protests and riots in Northern Ireland turned deadly in what was being described as a new and dangerous escalation in violence there. Still, there wasn't much international attention given to or focus on that story. And in the Solomon Islands, riots erupted once again following the presidential election there last week, where protesters even tried to storm the country's parliament. Well, that story hardly even made a blip on the media's radar.
And there's certainly been others, far too many to go into right now. But focusing on Venezuela, there's definitely been a change in timbre, a change in the overall tone of the story today. It's certainly more dramatic, it's more tense. But will this so-called uprising go down in the history books or be soon forgotten in history? We'll see. Rick.
We'll let history decide instead of writing it before it happens, as too often happens, I think, John, which may have been the gist of your story. We thank you, my friend. Good reporting as usual. I'm Rick Sanchez. You found us on YouTube, and that's awesome. But you know what? I'm also live every night at 7 and 8 p.m. Eastern on DirecTV and Dish and cable and satellite, the RT app, and Pluto TV. I'll see you there.